Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is migration movements, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the movements of people from place to place, AMcLaughlin8, who will give us some information in reference to her background, education, and some of her experiences. And then, of course, Lana, after doing that, we will have you to get into the topic of migration movements. But before we do that, let's have you to talk about your background, your education, and some of the things that were important in terms of bringing you to us this morning, recognizing that you've been with us for about, the last 8 years, dealing primarily with some of the things that you're dealing with now. But this is a new season, and so let's start off by talking about migration movements throughout places.
Well, as you previously stated, my name is AMcLaughlin8. I am a sophomore at the Nashville School of Arts, where I play trumpet. I am involved with Pearl Cone High School. I march in their band, and I do an array of things involving music, from piano lessons to playing trumpet. Now, my background in education that got me here is I've always been a gifted student. Here in Nashville, they have an encore program where gifted learners do, extracurricular activities to exercise their mind a bit. And I knew from a young age that speaking and sharing knowledge was something that I wanted to do, and that's what brought me here today.
And of course, we're glad to have you here today. But Lana, let's talk about migration movements. And I think that we can truly say that wherever you look throughout the world, you find that people are moving from place to place. And as a matter of fact, one of the great discussions that we have today in American history and politics is what? The movement of people, immigration, migration, call it what you wish. But let's talk about the movement of people from that perspective. And then when we come to this second segment, we'll be more specific in reference to what we're talking about.
Well, the big question is, what is migration? Which is, I know a lot of viewers are asking, what really is migration? Now, the textbook definition for migration is, well, for human migration is the movement of people from one place to another, whether it be permanent, temporary, it's just the movement of people. For instance, migration could be as simple as going to work in the morning. You're moving, whether it be temporary or permanent. Now, migration can be either international, intra-regional, in all these different types that we'll get into in the next segment that describe how people move and why they move. Factors such as push and pull factors either bring people towards their country. For instance, freedom brings people to the United States, while push factors, where it could be war, famine, poverty, lack of sanitation, push people out of countries. Places like Haiti and other countries of the sort have more push factors than pull, just because of natural disaster and things that go on within the countries. Now, all these different types of migration are very, very important, especially in this day and age where we have a president who wants to end a certain type of migration, which is chain migration. And we'll get more into this in the second segment, but a basic overview of chain migration is when, or with the United States specifically, is when an American citizen can vouch for a family member in different countries to come here via green card, and whoever they bring can stay. And now Trump wants to end this because he believes that it allows uneducated and underqualified people to come into the United States, and useless people and things of the sort. But we'll get more into this in the second segment.
And so you talk about push, pull migration and all of these migration movements. And what you're saying is not only are they applicable to the United States, but anywhere in the world you find the basic kinds of migratory movements.
There's migration everywhere, every single continent, even Antarctica.
And so whatever you say about migration in reference to the United States, you can also say about migration in reference to another country or another region, but primarily migration means the movement of people from place to place. And of course, I think I like that definition. And so what we'll do, we'll wait until the second segment to get into the various forms of migration. But I think
specific migration streams.
Migration, what you call migration streams.
Yeah.
And that'll give our audience an opportunity to have an overview as you're giving now, and then we'll be able to move into that second segment and deal primarily with the various aspects of migration. And so I would like to simply say that I appreciate the overview that you've given. And when you first approached me in reference to this particular topic, I had my doubts about it, but I'm sure that what you've said so far has reassured me in a real sense that there's an essence, there's something in what you're saying in reference to this. And so what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Okay, you sure don't touch it.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come.
Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to AMcLaughlin8, and she's given us some information in reference to migration movements. And of course, Lana, let's see if we can pick up where we left off the first segment and talk about the movement of people from place to place, nationally or internationally, as you indicated during the first segment. Let's talk about migration, define it in a real sense.
Now, in the first segment, we said that the big question for this episode this morning would be, what is migration? Now, like I said, the textbook definition of human migration is the movement of people from one place to another. Whether it be permanent settlement or temporary settlement, it's simply the movement of people. Now, migration has two major types. International, which is moving from country to country, for example, the United States to Canada, or intra-regional, which is staying within your country's boundaries. For example, it would be the United States, California to Colorado. That would still be in the same region. Now, these two types of migration are very important because they describe why people are moving and what they're moving for. For instance, international migration could be for jobs, for a better life, for better health care, to escape a country that's not doing so well. While interregional could be, say, for farmers, it would be, say, one piece of land you can't grow a certain crop on it anymore. So you move across, still within the same region, within your region's boundaries, but you move for smaller reasons. Now, international migration tends to be a little bit more serious in a way because usually there are bigger issues at hand when you choose to move internationally, because, you know, people don't just wake up and leave their country.
Barriers in a real sense.
Yeah. While intra-regional is more, I wouldn't say less serious, because, for instance, in the Rwandan genocide, not everybody left Africa, but they left Rwanda and et cetera, and went to different parts of Africa, went across the continent, but they left their country. So, but then there's a third type of migration that's not necessarily a type, but more of a form of it, which would be forced migration. And forced migration is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you're forced to leave your country, whether it be due to poverty or lack of sanitation, famine, or you're physically pushed out, say due to war or prejudice, racism, civil issues. You're being forced out of the country. It's not by choice at all. While the other two types can either be maybe by choice, or maybe you just felt like you had to, but forced migration, no conversation, you have to leave. An example of forced migration would be Syrian refugees fleeing Syria. They have no choice. If they'd stay, they'd be killed or they would starve, etc. So that's a type of forced migration. Now, when you delve deeper into migration, you see that there are two main factors that make people move, that describe why people move: push migration, or push factors, and pull factors. Now, a nice way to remember it is that think of someone pulling you towards them. You want to come. If someone's pushing you out, they want you out. So like I said, with the example with the Rwandan genocide, that would be a push factor. The people wanted to leave Rwanda because of all the issues that were going on. That would push you out. While people from third world countries look at countries like Canada and the US and continents like Europe and see that, oh, they're peaceful and they have things together. There's not, you know, lack of sanitation or a big poverty issue, or, you know, lack of food, and there's not a lot of natural disaster. So that's a pull factor. They see that we're doing better than their homeland, so they want to come. So we're pulling them by exposing our happy factors. Now, these two factors really, they can just describe almost any circumstance to where you would have to migrate. And it's good to know what's a push and what's a pull, because if you're in a situation where you need to leave your country or wherever you're at, your state or wherever, you're going to have to name, well, you should name the push and pull factors of wherever you're going, just so that you don't get into a worse situation. For instance, moving from Syria to, say, 1990s Rwanda. That would be a lot more push factors than pull, so you wouldn't really want to go there. So that's something that refugees and migrants have to think about. Going even deeper into migration, we think of types of migration. Now, the biggest one that, you know, the U.S. is talking about would be chain migration. If you haven't heard President Trump talk about it yet, the textbook definition of chain migration is basically when, think of how a chain, you know, it has links. One member goes somewhere and the rest follow. But how it relates to the United States is how we could be related to someone in, say, a third world country or just another country. If we sponsor them to get a green card, they can come over without having to go through like the 10-year wait of getting all your papers and etc. An American sponsored them so they can come. President Trump wants to end this because he believes that it brings unqualified and undereducated people into our country. And he cites things like terrorist attacks. For instance, a certain bomb in like New York, a bomber was here because he had a relative in America who sponsored him to come.
And so that's a chain, part of the chain that brought him here.
His family was here, so they brought him. And now chain migration is actually a lot more beneficial than, you know, than destructive, because it keeps families together. And it doesn't bring, you know, uneducated or underqualified people into our country. It brings people who want to make a change in their lives, who want more opportunities. And at the time that they initially come, they may have come from a war-torn country or a country where women couldn't get education. So they may not be, you know, as qualified for, you know, entry-level jobs as the average American who has a high school diploma and a college degree. but nevertheless they try. And I am in favor of chain migration because it keeps families together and it gives people an opportunity that they usually wouldn't have.
Now, would you say that chain migration offers the opportunity of having a background that allows those individuals that are pulled in by way of this chain to adjust to everything easier, and it allows them an opportunity to have more education?
Yes.
Primarily because they're going to where their folks or their family already is. Is that what you're saying?
Definitely, because if you're coming from war-torn or uneducated countries and you come getting an education in this country, you'll definitely have a more in-depth background.
Okay, so what we'll do, we'll take our second commercial break, and then we'll come back. We've got a 10-minute segment following this, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about several other aspects of migration. But I appreciate the emphasis you've laid out and the information that you've given so far. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. The topic is migration, and the guest is AMcLaughlin8, and she's given us some information in reference to the movement of people from place to place, and in a real sense trying to buy in to some of the political and social discussions that are present today in reference to how people move about, primarily in the United States as well as from outside of the United States. And let's pick up with this final segment, Lana, and give you an opportunity to continue to inform us and educate us in reference to migration.
Well, for viewers just tuning in, we talked about migration and what is migration, and the basic definition of migration would be the movement of people from one place to another, whether it be permanent or temporary. It's simply movement. And to describe why people move, why migration happens, you would use either, well, where instead of why would be either international, which is moving, example, from the United States to Canada, or intra-regional, and for example, it would be from California to Colorado. Now, when you go even deeper into that, why people move, there's a thing called push factors and then pull factors. Push factors encourage you to leave wherever you're at.
People are literally pushing you out of where you are.
Well, yeah, or factors are pushing you out. And it doesn't always have to be people. Now, people push you out would be forced migration, but I'll get into that in a second. Push factors environmentally would be, for example, natural disaster. Say Haiti. Haiti is at this very moment the poorest country in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's because of things like natural disaster, lack of sanitation, just horrible poverty, lack of food, not enough food for all the people that are there. Those factors push people out to where they don't want to be there. While pull factors would be, for instance, if I'm a Haitian reading about the United States or reading the benefits that the United States offers, pull factors from the U.S. would be free education, good health care, freedom, being able to vote for who you want, being able to live where you want, freedom of speech, things like that, things that you wouldn't get in, say, third world countries. Now, those factors pull you towards the United States, and that's really what explains why you move. Now, the third type that I mentioned, which is more of a form instead of a type, would be forced migration, and that's when you said people are literally pushing you out. That would be forced migration. You have no choice. You are forced to leave. Now, forced migration can also have environmental circumstances included in it. Like, for instance, if you're a Haitian and your house is completely destroyed due to natural disaster, you're forced to leave. You have nowhere to go. While if you're a Rwandan, say back in the 90s when the Rwandan genocide was going on, you're literally being forced to leave. Like, if you don't get out, you're going to be executed. People are literally pushing you at the back to get out. That's a type of forced migration also. So it's really an opinion-based thing. You decide what's a push factor and a pull factor. There's no set right or wrong answer. All this is really opinions, and that's what I like about things like political geography. It's really opinionated. But those are the main components when you're talking about migration: who, what, where, when, and why. Now, for who, anybody can migrate. Anyone is able to. If I am a 15-year-old African American who feels threatened in the United States, I can up and move. If you're an 80-year-old man who feels threatened in wherever, you can move. Anyone can migrate. Now, most migrants do tend to be younger. And a thing that I like about migration is families usually do like to stick together. Families don't really like to be separated. And that brings me to talk about chain migration. Now, chain migration is, if you think of a chain, it has links. Now, imagine the links as family members. Families like to stay together. So if one is moving countries, the others want to move as well. Now, how chain migration relates to the United States exactly would be the process that the United States has of chain migration, where an American can sponsor or vouch for someone in a different country to get their green card so that they can come over.
And that green card is important in terms of the ability to come over.
Exactly, because if you didn't have that, you would be an illegal immigrant or an alien, which is a derogatory term, but it's commonly used by some political figures. But this chain migration, this process, basically gives you an easy way to come over. And people migrate, like I said, for various reasons. And like I stated, the United States has lots and lots of pull factors. So people are really jumping at the opportunity to be able to move. And having this process is really, really good because it helps. For instance, it helps bring migrant workers into the United States, because as much as political figures like to say that they're taking up all our hardworking American jobs, they're not. there are jobs for hardworking Americans, but also we do need migrant workers because we don't want to end up in a situation where the dependency ratio, which is the ratio of people who can work to the people who cannot, we don't want the dependency ratio to be to where there's too many people who can't work and not enough people to work, which lowers the economy. We want to keep it stabilized, and it is fairly stabilized in the United States. We don't have like a tremendous amount of people who cannot work, like older people or disabled people, while a small number of adolescents or teenagers who can work, who are able-bodied. We don't have that. But to be able to maintain that, bringing migrant workers over via this chain migration process is really efficient, because we don't want to end up like other countries, like I said, whose dependency ratios have just skyrocketed. And the more old people or just disabled people who can't work, and the less people who can work, economy goes down. Then you end up with problems like lack of food, not enough money, higher taxes because no one's making money. And then you fall into all these economic problems, and that's just a whole nother show. But as much as politicians, well, certain politicians like to say that this is bringing in terrorists or et cetera, it's not. Like every batch of apples will have bad apples. Everything that you do will not have perfect people coming in and out. But just because there's a couple bad apples and a whole bunch doesn't mean that the whole bunch is bad. Because if everybody who came via chain migration was bad, if we thought that everyone who came would be bad, it wouldn't have been started in the first place. Chain migration, this process wouldn't have been allowed to go on for as long as it has. So basically what I'm trying to say is that it's not every person who comes from a different country to the United States is bad. There are some religious extremists, and we talked about religious extremism in the last show. There are some people who do come over to the United States to wreak havoc, but there are some people who go from the U.S. to third world countries to wreak havoc. People are just like that. That's just people. And
so you would say that it would be a disadvantage to limit or remove chain migration. Is that because that seems to me to be the safest kind of migration, because they're coming to folks that are already here, exactly, who can help to
vouch for them,
pave the way. Is that what?
And pave the way. And it's almost unethical to be able to tell somebody that they can't come from a war-torn country and they want to better themselves or get a proper education, raise their families in a safe place, to be able to tell them that no, they can't because some people ruined it for everybody. That's unethical, and that's not practical. And I do believe that if we do keep with these walls and all this in any chain migration, we will have a high dependency ratio, and the United States will fall into an economic crisis like that of the 30s and 40s. And so you believe that migration plays a significant role, and more people like yourself ought to become involved with the factors and understanding in reference to it, so that they might be able to make correct decisions in reference to people coming in